20 hours ago, they had the ceremony in Hiroshima. Started at 7:55 a.m. with a ceremonial offering of water to the victims, and then they opened it. They dedicated the register of the names of the people who died since the last one. They made an address. At 1 minute from 8:15 a.m. to 8:16 a.m. they ring the bell, and with everybody being silent, and then they have the release of doves and the commitment to peace and the messages from the distinguished guests, etc., in the song in the closing. So that's what they did this morning. And what the Secretary General said was, the Secretary General of the United Nations said, was nearly 8 decades ago a nuclear weapon incinerated Hiroshima. Yet as anyone who has visited knows, the memories never fade. The A-bomb dome, the cenotaph, and the dauntless Hibakusha, who are the survivors of the bombing, are constant reminders of the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons. For 78 years, the city of Hiroshima and the Hibakusha have worked tirelessly to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again. More people should do so because the drums of nuclear war are beating once again. That's the point I wanted to make. Mistrust and division are on the rise. The nuclear shadow that loomed over the Cold War has reemerged. And some countries are recklessly rattling the nuclear saber once again. This would be Russia. There's a war going on in Ukraine. At the time that the Ukraine was founded in the modern era in 1991, it became the third largest nuclear power in the world. It had more bombs than China, or either Great Britain or France combined, or whatever. The only countries that had more bombs than Ukraine did were Russia and the United States, and that's because Russia had put a lot of bombs in the Ukrainian country, but the Russians had all the codes. The Ukrainians had the scientists, but they didn't have the codes. They could not have used them if they wanted to. So there was a lot of negotiation, and eventually all the bombs were sent back to Russia and decommissioned, and all the sites were, with a lot of American help, all the sites were cleaned, and there was a pact made that Russia would never use those bombs that they turned on them, and that America, England, and Russia would guarantee their safety once they'd given up all the bombs that were supposed to be keeping them safe as a nuclear deterrent, which, who believes in that? But by the way, I'm talking that way and you guys are all over there and it's annoying the heck out of me. Could you guys maybe come over here?
And you'll let us know when we need to come up to speak?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, okay, let me finish this story then. And then we can have a prayer, but I forget where I was. They made it. Yeah, right. And then, of course, Russia attacked Ukraine and it didn't go as well as they expected it to, and they started threatening nuclear weapons of all sorts. Now, there's another point I could make, is that there were standard weapons which were for obliterating large areas, and they invented something called tactical nuclear weapons, which are supposed to be used on the battlefield and are just for winning battles instead of for destroying countries. Now, they claim they have a lot less fallout and a lot less of that stuff, but who knows? Anyhow, in fact, George H.W. Bush had decided they were stupid, and he got rid of them all when he was president from 1988 to 1992. He got rid of all of America's tactical nuclear weapons, but they have been rebuilt since, and better. And some of them are 3 times as powerful as the non-tactical weapon that obliterated Hiroshima. But anyhow, it now seems likely that Russia is not planning to drop a giant bomb on the Ukraine, but it continues to threaten the tactical ones. And let me quote from July 30th of last month, which is like a week ago. Dmitry Medvedev, who was the president of Russia at one point and is now the uh, Commissioner, National Security Council Deputy Chairman, said, "Just imagine that the NATO-supported offensive turned out successful and they took away a part of our land. Then we would have to, following the president's decree, use the nuclear weapon. That's why our enemies must worship our warriors. They are keeping global nuclear fire from flaring up," Medvedev said, referring to Russian efforts to stop the Ukrainian offensive. Medvedev has not been shy in using Russia's nuclear arsenal to threaten Ukraine and its Western supporters. During Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin's failed coup, Medvedev said the rebellion could lead to a nuclear war. Before that, Medvedev had said that the war in Ukraine could be brought to an end within a few days by doing what the Americans did in 1945 when they deployed nuclear weapons and bombed two Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What more can I say? Marlene.
Thank you, Judy. We're here to commemorate the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima 78 years ago today. Just as Judy outlined to us, we're not just looking at something from the past, but we're also facing the real divisions and the real possibility of nuclear use again. In Hiroshima, it says that it was a mistake and that it should never happen again. But we all know that wherever there is division, wherever there is hate, wherever there is an opposition where one looks to another person and sees them as less than, there is the opportunity for destruction. And so as we gather here today, we're gathered here to stand against destruction, against division. So I'm asking you if you would please bow your head, spend a little time in silent reflection, and think about the gift of life that you have and the gift of life that is shared, not just among friends, not just among family or neighbors, but among all people in all creation. And then I'll close with prayer. We stand in the sunshine that embraces our skin, our earth, the grass, the trees, and the seas. We stand together, connected through a loving web of life that seeks to encourage and nurture each other so that there might be a fruitfulness, a fulfillment, and a fullness in the earth. We gather together in thanks and in hope for a future of abundance and one that is not racked by fear of scarcity. We gather together so that we might stand together, acknowledging that we are each a part of one another. And so we are created, and so we are redeemed, and so we are sustained. None of us is beyond redemption. None of us is beyond forgiveness. And on this day of commemoration, we recognize that in ourselves, in our nation, in our world, in those that we count as friends and those that we count as enemies. We stand together being sustained by life, by peace, by hope, and by the spirit that knits us together, that helps in our weakness to encourage one another to be strong. Our strength does not come from being divided, but to be united across lands, across oceans, across the sky. And so we are here to commemorate lives lost, lives lived, mistakes made, and promises to be renewed. For this we do in the name of the God that creates, redeems, and sustains. Amen.
How many roads must a man walk down before you can see, before you can call him a man? Yes, and how many seas must the white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they are forever men? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before you can see the sky? Yes, and how many tears must one man have before he can hear people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till we know that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? Yes, and how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Yes, and how many times can a man turn his head, pretending he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. We've got. I copied two eyewitness accounts. One of them is 3 pages long, and the other one is 4 pages long, I think. I don't know how many we want to read. I didn't know how many people would show up. Steve, you want to start? Okay. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that might work. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is called Pursued by Cries by Asai Miyakoshi. I was 25 when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. In all the years since then, I have not been able to forget what happened. And it's still very hard for me to talk about it. At that time, both my parents were dead and my husband had gone off to war. Burned out of our home in Osaka by air raids, my 5 children, aged between 1 and 4, and I sought refuge with my grandfather in Hiroshima. I had lost the hearing in my left ear as a result of the Osaka bombings. In Hiroshima, I lived at Hiratsuka-sho, 1.8 kilometers from the hypocenter, in a household of 10, including my 69-year-old grandfather, my sisters aged 21 and 18, a 16-year-old cousin, and my children. Does anyone want to take over? You want me to continue for a paragraph?
Yeah, why don't you continue for another?
All right. On the morning of August 6th, I breathed a sigh of relief when the all clear sounded. My cousin Hiromi left for work at the military shoe factory in Fukushima-sho. Michiko, my youngest sister, who normally would have been setting off for the munitions factory where she worked, had gone out to do labor service in the neighborhood since she had the day off. My grandfather was a religious man and went to the Buddhist temple as he did every morning, carrying my 1-year-old on his back and holding my 2-year-old twins by the hand. My 3- and 4-year-old daughters, Etsuko and Tamiko, who had been playing in the garden, attached themselves to him and scampered off.
They might hear you.
Thus, only my sister Hisako and I were left at home. I had been about to use the toilet as the all clear sounded, but my sister had gone in before me. I entered a few minutes later, just as the bomb fell. Because of my partial deafness, I did not hear anything. Suddenly, I found the house collapsed around me and myself trapped in the lavatory. Perhaps irrationally, I cried out for help over and over again. And finally, a man broke the door in and pulled me out. Looking around for my sister, I saw her lying sprawled in the corridor, the right side of her body covered with terrible burns. She had probably been washing her hands, with her right hand stretched over the wash basin when caught by the searing heat. I put my sister on my back and fled barefoot to Hijiyama Park. Her face was festering from her burns, and her right eye was hanging out. I pushed the eye back into its socket and tried to use a gauze mask to hold it in place. But her ear had melted away, and there was nothing to attach the mask to. Her mouth was twisted to the right, and she could do no more than whimper for water, only the first syllable of the word emerging distinctly.
Oh, no, we're reading through this. Okay, would you like to continue with the reading? Yes.
I'll just get the short one.
Just, no, we're,
This is the second one.
No, we're still going. We're still going. We're on reaching. Is that where we are?
On reaching
Okay.
Hirayama Park. Yep, right here.
How do you pronounce that?
Hijiyama.
On reaching Hijiyama Park, I laid my sister down on the ground and set off to search for my children. The fires were still burning fiercely. In a streetcar that had burned bright red, surrounded by people already killed by the fire. I saw a woman still holding on to a strap and calling for help. The intense heat prevented me from approaching her. However, there was nothing I could do. To a man sitting on some stone steps, I said, "Come on, let's get away from here," and pulled him up by the hand. But as I did so, the skin came away from his hand and he fell slowly to the ground. I could see how his shadow imprinted clearly on the wall behind where he had been sitting. Many people called out to me for help or water, unburned because of having been in the lavatory. I could only bring my hands together and apologize to the people I passed as I searched for some sign of my children. As it turned out, none of those who had left that morning ever came home again, not my 5 children, my grandfather, my sister Mashiko, or my cousin. Not a bone remained for me to find and treasure. Our house burned down so that I had not even a photograph to remember them by. My sister Hisako drew her last breath 4 days later, on the evening of August 10th, in agony from her massive injuries. I will never forget the expression on her face when I tried to give her a drop of water. I was alone. Do you want me to continue? No. I can do it, Steve, if you want. Okay, I'll continue. When the war ended on August 15th, I wept to think that the surrender had not come just a few days earlier. My misery was compounded when I learned that my husband had been killed in battle in New Guinea. In a short while, I began suffering the physical effects of the atomic bombing: diarrhea, fever, and bleeding gums. Even now, I continue to have nightmares of my children crying out that their feet are burning. Did they really suffer like that? I had not even been able to give a cup of water to those who had called out to me for help. Was there ever suffering like theirs? However much I tried to put these memories behind me, the cries continued to pursue me. My own physical suffering continues. I remarried after the war, but physically I have gradually deteriorated and now can do no more than hobble around the house with a stick. I detest the United States. I feel anger toward the Japanese government for its present policy of cooperation with a country that could inflict such suffering on another people. Listen to me wherever you are. The suffering of those who experienced the atomic bombing continues even now, and the effects of the radiation are being passed on to their children and their children's children. I beg that never again may nuclear weapons be inflicted on anyone, anywhere.
Do we need another reading, or was that enough? That's enough. Okay, we have Tracy has a speech to make, and Mary Ellen has a speech to make, and then whoever else wants to say anything.
Good evening, fellow peace activists. Today we gather here to reflect upon one of the most consequential and controversial decisions in human history, the United States' decision to drop the atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. 78 years have passed since those fateful days in August 1945, and the legacy of those events continues to shape our understanding of the use of nuclear weapons and the pursuit of peace. In August 1945, the world was engulfed in the flames of war. The Pacific battles of World War II had seen tremendous loss of life and destruction. The Japanese forces had displayed their unwavering resolve to fight to the bitter end, and Allied leaders faced a difficult choice: to continue the war and risk countless more lives, or to attempt to bring the conflict to a swift conclusion through a new and devastating weapon, the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, instantly claiming tens of thousands of lives and leaving the city in ruins. Despite the horror and devastation, Japan did not surrender immediately. On August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, adding to the death toll and devastation. In the context of World War II, it is important to note that Japan initiates the conflict by bombing Pearl Harbor, a military base, while the United States made the difficult decision to drop the atomic bombs on civilian targets to achieve a swift end to the war. The decision to drop the atomic bombs remains a topic of intense debate even to this day. Critics argue that the bombings were unnecessary, inhumane, and constituted an act of terror against civilian populations. They contend that Japan was already weakened, and a combination of factors, including the Soviet Union's entry into the war and the prospects of a naval blockade, would have likely led to Japan's surrender. On the other hand, proponents of the decision argued that the bombings were instrumental in ending the war swiftly, potentially saving millions of lives that would have been lost in a protracted land invasion of Japan. They emphasized the concept of total war that had characterized the conflict and the Japanese leadership's determination to fight until the last man. Following the successful development and deployment of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, one of the key scientists behind the project, expressed deep remorse and inner conflict over his role in creating such a devastating weapon of mass destruction. He famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita saying, quote, "Now I become death, the destroyers of worlds," reflecting on the profound ethical dilemmas and moral responsibility involved in unleashing the destructive power of nuclear technology upon humanity. Oppenheimer's sentiments served as a reminder of the complexities and moral implications inherent in scientific advancement and the grave consequences that can follow. You can learn more about Oppenheimer in theaters with the recent release of the film In His Name, which is actually based off of a book. As we gather here today, it is essential that we approach the historical moment with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to learning from the past. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remind us of the unimaginable human cost of armed conflict and the terrible power of nuclear weapons. They serve as a stark warning of the consequences that can be unleashed when diplomacy and peace efforts fail. In the aftermath of World War II, the international community came together to establish the United Nations and promote global cooperation and peaceful resolutions to conflicts. We must strive to preserve and strengthen these diplomatic channels, for only through dialogue and understanding can we prevent the horrors of war and the use of nuclear weapons from ever occurring again. Today, let us remember the innocent lives lost in those bombings, and let us recommit ourselves to the pursuit of peace and the establishment of a world free from the threat of nuclear destruction. May we learn that the lessons of history and work together a future where peace, compassion, and understanding prevail. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Most of you know me as Mary Ellen Kirkulis. I'm actually here to tell you a little bit more about what this commemoration, this somber commemoration, has meant to lots of people, not just across the state, but across the world, and how we were actually at a moment where there's an opportunity to move forward and potentially abolish nuclear weapons. Right now, we are part of more than 24 events that are occurring and will be occurring in the coming days across the state, from Pittsfield to Worcester, Andover, Bridgewater, Watertown, and more. And this represents a movement that is not quite in its infancy. It's proceeded beyond that, but it's still needs some power to grow. That where people here in Massachusetts, in the US, and across the world are working hard to ensure that such horrors never happen again and to abolish nuclear weapons. And as part of that, I'd like to tell you about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It is a campaign that stems from the international treaty that entered into force 2.5 years ago. That treaty, UN treaty, prohibits both the development and sale or participation of any kind in nuclear weapons. And it is international law that provides a way for the nuclear powers to disarm. So far, 92 countries have signed on to this treaty, and 68 have ratified, meaning they're on the way to be signatories. It was a years-long effort that was led by Mexico, Norway, and Austria, spurred by activists in countries largely in the global south, who were very alarmed by certain developments, especially how the protective scaffolding of arms treaties that ended the Cold War and lowered our risk of a nuclear war are gone now. They had provided a measure of safety, but but that and also the abandonment by the nuclear powers of a historic non-proliferation treaty that was enacted and signed upon by the nuclear powers in 1970. So these groups and activists across the world were part of an international campaign against nuclear weapons, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for this work. Now, this important treaty is not surprisingly opposed by all 9 nuclear powers. They've refused to consider it, and in fact, the U.S. has worked actively behind the scenes to strong-arm countries to prevent them from ratifying it. The next thing I want to say is how today some are comparing the danger, the very true danger that the other speakers explained, to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. But in fact, the reality is that today's danger is far greater, but not appreciated. Unlike that crisis, some in the U.S. now are openly considering and even recommending using nuclear weapons. Keep in mind that experts at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists have set the iconic doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been to midnight, in other words, nuclear Armageddon. People don't understand that the reason that this treaty scaffolding has eroded is because George W. Bush withdrew from the ABM, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, and then Trump, who withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, that historic agreement between Reagan and Gorbachev at the end of the 80s. And he also withdrew from the Open Skies Treaty that prohibits warfare and nuclear warfare in space. We should be disarming our nuclear arsenal so this never happens again. And beyond that, people are not aware of what the U.S. has embarked upon, a $2 trillion nuclear modernization program launched by Obama and strongly supported by President Biden. This program creates newer, more nimble, in other words, more usable nuclear weapons, and Massachusetts is at the core of it. Our companies, Raytheon and Boston's Draper Labs, including as well as Hanscom Air Force Base, are right at the center. And that's why I believe, and many, many people around the world, are fighting for this nuclear ban treaty to be enacted by the United States. And in fact, we can all do something because in the Massachusetts legislature, 3 bills have been submitted by a Peace and Justice Network in the Commonwealth. This is a legislative initiative led by Mass Peace Action, NuclearBan.us, that's based in Northampton, and Ira Helfand of the Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility. 2 of these bills have been heard before committees. The Nuclear Weapons Divestment Act, which would divest state pensions from corporations involved in the manufacture of maintenance of nuclear weapons, manufacture or maintenance of nuclear weapons, as well as a Nuclear Weapons and Climate Commission to investigate, study, and recommend actions for the state to better protect our citizens from both nuclear weapons and climate change, because these are, in fact, the 2 existential threats we face. We will be able to help these efforts by contacting our state legislators, and meaning that we can advance those bills to the floor of the legislature so that they can be up for votes. A third platform, the Back from the Brink platform, will be heard in committee soon. And that will be an opportunity for us to offer oral and or written testimony to support it, as I have done so in the past. Now, further than just the Massachusetts legislature, in Congress, there is a Back from the Brink initiative that is sponsored by Jim McGovern of Worcester, House Resolution 77. And this calls on the U.S. to sign the nuclear ban treaty and also pursue 5 steps to immediately reduce the danger of nuclear war. First, the U.S. should adopt a no first use policy. This would end the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear attack. Second, it would take the weapons off of hair trigger alert. And third, it would cancel this nuclear modernization program. So far, there have been 36 members of Congress that have joined Representative McGovern, as well as our own Ayanna Pressley, and surprisingly, Richard Neal of Springfield, who is one of the more conservative Democrats in the House. Everyone else, including Representative Jake Auchincloss of Newton, along with the rest of the Massachusetts House delegation. Yes, Jake Auchincloss is Fall River's representative in Congress. They have all failed to do so. So this is an opportunity for us to lobby Jake Auchincloss and have him co-sponsor this very important legislative initiative. And additionally, we would also like to encourage the senators, Elizabeth Warren and our own, as well as Ed Markey, to file similar legislation in the Senate. I mean, their record on nuclear weapons is much better than most, certainly in Congress, but they could be doing more. So if anyone wants more information from me about these initiatives and the movement to abolish nuclear weapons and have the United States take the lead in this direction, I have some materials and I can also supply you with more information. Okay, thanks a lot.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say on the subject? Susan, do you want to? No. The next thing we have to do is float our flowers down the river.
Sure. I'll just say a couple words. Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Susan Lee, retired member of the Episcopal clergy in this area. And I just want to say how grateful I am to Judy and to Mary Ellen and others who have organized this remembrance. You know, August 6, 1945 and August 9th, 1945 were the only times nuclear weapons have been used in the history of the world, both times by the United States. And so, you know, as American citizens, I feel we have a special responsibility to try to move the needle and certainly move our country, including the Democrats, to a position of abolishing nuclear weapons. Thank you, Judy.
Anyone else have anything to say? Over there where we can actually get the flowers into the river. Who needs flowers? Okay, yeah, whatever. Flowers. You're going over there, just over to the river, or just sitting there?
I'll take a flower. Just a flower. Perfect. Thank you.
Where have all the flowers